It's a speculative tale. It looks at it takes a sideways glance at where we're heading as a society, at the pace of technology, at AI. It was framed by the media as a peasants' revolt or a David versus Goliath fight, and you had on one hand allotment holders who just wanted to tend their land. On the other hand, you had one of the richest and most powerful people in the UK, and we won ultimately. We saved that site, and she gave me the fantastic advice that if you want to say something deep and meaningful about the world, you should smuggle it in a murder mystery because people read them.
Salman, welcome to the World XP podcast. How are you today?
I'm good, thanks, Eric. Thanks for having me. Delighted to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So, do you want to give the people a quick intro, who you are and what you do, and then we can jump into the question from the last guest, and then I'm sure it'll lead us into the rest of the conversation. You, as kind of many of the other guests on here, are involved in a multitude of things, and so definitely excited to pick your brain on a few of those things. And but anyways, the floor is yours. You there?
Oh dear, that was a blip at the beginning. Should we start that again? Do you think? I
Yeah,
don't know if
let's
it's my internet or your
hold
internet.
on. Let's do it one more time. Uh, that's fine. I'll just keep the recording going and chop the beginning off. That's fine. Salman, welcome to the World XP podcast. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you, Eric. Thanks for having me on here. Delighted to be here with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And you, like some of the other guests, are involved in a multitude of things. So definitely excited to pick your brain on a variety of topics. But as the people listening know, we'll start off with the quick intro, the elevator pitch, who you are and what you do, and the question from the last guest. And I'm sure we'll have a lovely conversation. But yeah, the floor is yours. Introduce yourself to the people.
Yeah, thank you. Well, my name's Salman Shaheen. I'm a writer. I'm a politician in West London. I'm a journalist, and I've just got my debut novel, Freeborn, out, which has just arrived. Just arrived in the post. Very excited. Very excited to talk about that. Murder mystery thriller with a bit of a sci-fi twist. That's coming out on 28th of October.
Very nice, very nice. So the question from the last guest is there one friend or influence from your childhood who you lost connection with that you wish you hadn't, and what's stopping you from reaching back out to them?
Ah, wow! What a good question. What a fantastic question. Is there one friend? I think there are a number of friends that I had during childhood that you sort of you go through periods of your life and they're very important to you. I can think of certainly a couple of friends from childhood, and primarily because I've moved location. I grew up in the countryside, in rural Suffolk. It's a bit like if you can imagine Luke Skywalker staring at the twin suns of Tatooine and saying if there's a bright center to the universe, you're on the planet that's furthest from it. It's a place where it is beautiful. It's absolutely stunningly beautiful, and actually a lot of the locales and the rural idyll setting went into Freeborn. But I very much had my sights set on moving to London, on becoming a writer, becoming a journalist, becoming a politician. And you do lose touch with people along the way, but I always do remember the friends I had growing up with at school, who were just such wonderful people. And I think just distance is really the only thing that stops one keeping in touch quite as much as one wants with one's roots.
Yeah. No, I totally get that. And same as you move around, you lose touch with people. It's just kind of the way that life goes naturally, I think. But let's jump into the novel. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. And obviously, you mentioned the twist, the sci-fi twist there. So we won't do too many spoilers and things like that. Where did the idea come from? And and where I'm specifically getting with that is there's lots of whodunit murder mysteries out there, and kind of they're a bit of a dime a dozen, and if they're written well, they're pretty much all enjoyable, right? It gets the brain going. It's like, oh, who did it? Like you're narrowing down the suspects and all those sorts of things. But the way that you have shaped this story specifically, um, where did these ideas come from? Is there something that you've been working with in real life that kind of influenced that, or where did the idea come from to shape it in the way that you did?
So, I mean, this might be a slightly long answer. There are many different strands that have coalesced into Freeborn, and Freeborn's a little bit like an onion. You can read it, on a superficial level as a murder mystery, and you can read it cover to cover, and by the end, a murder happens at the beginning. Some more murders happen as you go along, and by the end, you'll find out who done it. But it's really not it's actually not a murder mystery. Everything is wrapped up in this murder mystery, in the conventions of a murder mystery, but there's a lot more going on in
Yep.
Freeborn. It's a speculative tale. It asks, it looks at, it takes a sideways glance at where we're heading as a society, at, the pace of technology at AI. And I had all these ideas in my mind that you think about where we are heading. You look at Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI. He when he launched GPT-5, he said he was scared. He said he likened it to the Manhattan Project. He didn't know, he wasn't quite couldn't quite fathom actually how much it could do, and that's scary. And you take that forward. We are on the cusp here of a technological revolution, and we don't have the guardrails in place to be able to properly control that. So skip forward a couple of decades, where did that take us? That's one idea I had in my head. I also sort of wanted to see, what philosophically the advance of technology means for human freedom. And what is human freedom anyway? Are we born to be what we are, or are we what society made us? And there are all these sort of interplay between Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Thomas Hobbes, these philosophical ideas that went into Freeborn, and a reference subtly there, which you can peel away the layer of the onion and look at it as a philosophical novel, a literary novel, and how all these things sort of came together. I wanted to write a philosophical novel. I wanted to write a speculative novel. I wanted to ask big questions. I wanted to include politics and all of that kind of stuff. But many years ago, I was literature editor of Varsity, the Cambridge University student newspaper, and had the good fortune of interviewing one of my heroes, sadly since passed away, Jill Patton Walsh. She wrote a fantastic philosophical novel called Knowledge of Angels, and she also wrote a couple of murder mystery series. And she gave me the fantastic advice that if you want to say something deep and meaningful about the world, you should smuggle it in a murder mystery because people read them. So that's kind of how the idea came. But the twist, I'm not going to tell you what the twist is. You know what the twist is. I'm not
Yeah,
going to tell
yeah.
you readers, your viewers, what the twist is. I don't think that's ever been done before in fiction, not that I know of anyway. And that idea, just as I was kind of percolating how I was going to pull this together, this twist, I actually just woke up one morning thinking about it, and thought, my God, that wouldn't that be crazy to write? And I bet no one has ever written a murder mystery like that before. And then later on, when ChatGPT was invented, I asked ChatGPT if anyone had, and it told me no. I don't know if it was just flattering me, but I think AI seems to think it hasn't been done before.
Yeah, I don't recall seeing that sort of thing in any of the ones that I've read either. Although, to your point, ChatGPT, you have to tell it to be honest with you, because otherwise it'll just tell you what you want to hear, and sometimes that's not ideal for sure.
Yeah, no,
And I've
I did have a Google around as well, and you
yeah.
really do have to interrogate it. But I'm not a luddite. I do believe in technology. I do think that it's hugely powerful. But just to the point on where AI is taking us, ChatGPT is revolutionizing the economy right now. Right now, every workplace in the country is becoming its productivity is shooting through the roof by orders of magnitude, and yet most of the graduate entry level jobs have just vanished overnight. If you were a student 3 years ago and you were beginning to study for university, the jobs you expected to be graduating into 3 years later don't exist anymore.
Yep.
And that is a huge problem. So the question is, yes, this technology is good, but how do we apply it? And are we ready for it? And do we have the guidelines and guardrails to protect ourselves from what could be quite devastating for our society?
Yeah, I think that happens with every technological revolution, to be honest. The technology outpaces the ethics and the morals, and because we as a society haven't worked through that, it's a new thing, right? And you've got people who are kind of maybe thinking about it. You got think tanks being like, okay, this is how we should use this new technology, but that doesn't mean it percolates throughout the rest of society until there's some time and it's really taken its time to kind of take a foothold in the rest of society, and then people realize, like normal everyday people realize, like who aren't on the cutting edge of whatever it is, are like, no, we shouldn't use it this way, we shouldn't use it that way, and eventually it kind of like works itself out. But in the meantime, and we see this with almost every kind of revolution currently, right? Within media, within the medical space, within technology, there's going to be a Wild West period where everyone's figuring it out. People have lost trust in a lot of the media institutions, and then they go to X to get their news or whatever, and some of the news on X is good and some of it isn't good. And so same with medical, right? There's people have lost trust due to the last 5 years in the pandemic and what the medical institutions are saying, and big pharma and all these things, and so they go to alternative places, and some of those places are good and some are not. And people really have to do their own research and due diligence to kind of sort out um, honestly what's best for them. And you come around to this in the book a little bit. There's some protesters and some people taking stands against. I'm trying to say it without kind of spoiling things. There's people taking stands against issues and things that they care heavily about at the cost, at their own detriment. Um, and that kind of phenomena, I think, is an interesting one to wrap your head around, because you've got that force on one side, and then you've also got the politician who seems to be using it for that instance for his own gain, and both of these things kind of collide in a very strange way. Um, and I think I mean, to me, when I read it, I was like, if there isn't a more accurate referendum on the way that things are currently at the moment, I don't know what is. Um,
Yeah,
but yeah,
you've got populism. That's right. You've got these sort of grassroots protest movements as well. Actually, antagonistic to the populist politician, but they're both populists in their own way. It's the
yes,
forces of science and faith are diametrically opposed to one another. And yeah, a lot the central characters of Freeborn, Harry and his friends, really, they're trying to navigate that world. Trying to see if there are middle grounds between what is an increasingly polarized society, which you find in Freeborn and we are finding now as well.
yeah. And one of the things that I thought was interesting, or I think is interesting about current society, is at least in the US anyways, and I'm not sure if this is the case in the UK, but there seems to be a revitalization of religion, specifically Christianity in the United States. Are you and I think for a while, at least growing up, people are like, "Oh, science and religion, they don't mix." And I was always of the opinion, like, why do they not mix? They can both be true in their own way. Um, and it seems to be that sort of that religious kind of revolution is taking place. You saw this especially after the murder of Charlie Kirk, that a lot of people were like, "I picked up a Bible for the first time," and all these things. And so I think from the perspective of the book about the ethical questions and things like that, I think to me that can only be a good thing. I don't, is a similar phenomena happening in the UK as well?
I think to a lesser degree, much lesser degree. I mean, the UK is a very old country. Well, England, Scotland, its constituent parts are very old, and we have. I mean, it's quite it's quite the opposite in many ways to the United States. You obviously you don't have a state religion. You are founded upon a constitution of actually much like the French rejecting religion, and yet society is very religious in the United
Well,
States. We have a
I would alter that and say, in a lot of the state constitutions, like the colonial constitutions before the national one, Christianity was called out very explicitly. And I think the avoidance was more to avoid like a theocracy type situation. So I don't think it was a rejection of religion. The Declaration of Independence calls out God a few times and things of
mm,
that nature. So I just wanted to alter that
no,
slightly.
that's completely fair. I wouldn't say a rejection of religion particularly, but a rejection of state religion, which is what
Sure.
we have in the UK. We have a state religion in the UK, which is the Church of England. And yet, because that's sort of, I think because it's been so established and so much the norm of society for so long, people have sort of drifted away from it. It just hasn't become a facet of everyday life, particularly. people haven't needed to feel that they needed to reassert it particularly. And obviously, we have other religious communities that have come into our society, and some of the larger forms of religiosity can be amongst religions from other parts of the world. Obviously, Britain had a globe spanning empire, and we have a large population of people who've come from those former colonies, and bringing the rich diversity of religions that they have with us. So we've become quite a melting pot of different ideas, different faiths, different philosophies, different religions. But I don't think the sort of the kind of fundamentalist versions of those religions haven't particularly come to the fore, I think, in British society. I do think that some of those extremes do bubble to the surface sometimes, and you see that not just in Christianity, you see that in Islamic fundamentalism. Of course, we just had a absolutely reprehensible terror attack on a synagogue in Manchester only a few days ago, and by all accounts, it appears to have been an Islamist fundamentalist who was the perpetrator of that. So you do have some of that. You do also have, I think you find, and I think that those religious fundamentalists who are co-opting what would otherwise be a peaceful faith and turning it into a weapon of political dogma, are a very dangerous society, and that's true of Islamic fundamentalists. It's true also of fundamentalists in other religions as well. And you can see the kind of the far right marches we've had recently, which have been primarily, in response to historically high levels of immigration that we've seen since Brexit, which is particular economic conditions that we can talk about as to why they're happening. But there's been a lot of fervor whipped up around those. And I think certain demagogic individuals, Tommy Robinson is one in particular, who have become figureheads of this movement, have tried to co-opt Christianity, an extreme form of Christianity, into that, in the same way that some people have in the United States. And again, much like the Islamist fundamentalists, I think that's it's a shame that a religion which has many great ideas, and many flaws as well, but there's many great moral teachings within religion. I feel like it's a shame those sort of good teachings can be co-opted into something baser, and you see that in Freeborn. I think many of the protesters, and I think it's fair to say, without giving too much away, that they are protesting against scientific advancements that happen within the novel. Many of those use religion as a tool to call out science, and
Hmm.
it becomes polar opposites. And again, where is the truth? There must be some truth somewhere, but it's getting drowned out by potentially the loudest voices.
Yeah. Um, you mentioned Tommy Robinson, who's a name that I have only heard very recently. Um, and we can touch on this for a little bit and then kind of get back to the book. But I'm very curious because I think, at least in the US, some of the people that are labeled as far right by like the media are not, well, just not at all. And so from an American perspective, and you are not the only person that I've heard use that term for those protests. So this is not a knock on you. My first reaction is like, okay, so he's probably not that far right, and somebody just disagrees with him, right? Can you explain kind of the situation you mentioned? It's in response to historically high levels of
Mm.
immigration. We have seen in the U.S. similar sorts of things where under the last administration. I don't think it's controversial to say at this point that the border was wide open, and people are not very happy about that. There's been funding of um, like healthcare and other things for people that entered the U.S. illegally, and people just are like, "Hey, man, but I don't even have healthcare, so why are you giving it to these people that like don't aren't even they just came here illegally. They already broke the law." And so, from a U.S. perspective, what I'll say the upsetness, for lack of a better word, in England makes sense to an American who isn't on the ground and who's there. Can you sort of explain what is going on? Because I've also seen, like, for instance, um Gary Neville made he like pulled down a Union Jack, I think, and got suspended off Sky Sports for I don't remember what the exact time, but there was some controversy there. And it's like, well, one, why are you pulling? So maybe this is also ignorant American. I don't know exactly. I know the Union Jack is for the UK, but you also have St. George's and a few
Mm.
other flags that are going. But like to me, it's like, why are you even pulling that down? Like, why is that a Like, one, why is that crossing your mind to pull that flag down? Because it's the flag of your own country. And then two, why is this now a controversy where people are upset with it? And then his comments were something about white guys being upset with him pulling down the flag. And it's like, well, one, that seems like a silly thing to like, just of all the things that you could say, that doesn't seem like a very wise thing to say out loud, anyways. But the whole thing to me just seems ridiculous on a variety of levels. So I will, that's my understanding, but please let me know what is going on.
There's a lot of questions in there.
Yeah, for
Take
sure.
them one by one. First of all, why I would describe Tommy Robinson as far right now, universally in the media he is described as far right. It's not just my description. So let's take parallels to the US. Who would be the opposite of Trump in the UK? That would be someone like Nigel Farage, who is leading Reform, who are doing very well in the polls. They used to be the Brexit Party before that, the UK Independence Party. I would describe them as a right-wing party. I wouldn't describe them as far right. I would describe them as, a little bit MAGA, but not outright fascists. So that you can have a conversation with them. I might disagree with them, but you can have a conversation with them. Tommy Robinson comes from a very different background to that. He comes from a background of an organisation called the English Defence League, who were fascist football hooligans who would riot on the streets essentially. He's been imprisoned various times for breaches of the law, and has whipped up hatred on a scale that it's a very different kettle of fish from Nigel Farage. You would struggle to have a conversation with Tommy Robinson about what you disagreed with in a civilized way. Um,
Before you,
to the point
before
that
you,
Nigel Farage has said that he wouldn't have Tommy Robinson in his party, even though Elon Musk wants him to.
before you keep going, can we just for the audience listening, like what do you mean by because the term fascist gets thrown a lot here in the
Mm,
US for people who are not that at all, right? And it's kind of lost some of its weight, I think,
mm.
at least in the US. So can we just get like define the term so that people know like what do you mean by that?
I would say whipping up racial hatred would be a prime example. Deliberately stirring up hatred, using violence, spreading misinformation to intimidate those of different ethnic minorities, and pursuing a very, 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 very hard right, set of values towards society. Often, traditionally, of course, fascism, dates back to Mussolini. Parallel with Nazism, we're talking about ultimately when it takes control of society. Fascism is about state control and a very hierarchical system. We're not talking about that because the fascists aren't in charge in the UK, but we are talking about some of that sort of um, precursors that you did see in those in those countries historically, where you had street movements of people who were causing intimidation, which ultimately led to the rise of fascist governments. I would differentiate. It's a huge spectrum, society and politics. There are people on the hard left, people on the hard right, but there are some, and most of whom I would happily have a conversation with, debate with. Say you think that, I think that. Well, I'll still have a beer with you afterwards. Right?
Yeah.
But there are some views I think are particularly detrimental to the functioning of a civil society, because they are views that are attempt to whip up violence, actual physical violence, which I think is wrong. Um, but to come to your questions about the situation, I think there's a lot going on, but the probably to go back to Brexit is probably the key linchpin of this. So we had in the UK, when we were part of the European Union, if people came over on a small boat, paid a people smuggler, tried to get over into the UK, often people in absolutely dire circumstances, people who are fleeing war and oppression, with the Syrian civil war, with the Taliban rising again in Afghanistan. People, you wouldn't stay there if you were in that country, so you try and get out. When we're in the European Union, the EU is bound to take you are bound to be your asylum claim would be processed in the first country within the union that you landed in. And so if anyone then decided, I don't want to be in France, I'll come to the UK. And there are historically valid reasons as to why people might want to come to the UK. English being a prime example of that, familial connections. There are many reasons as to why people might want to come to the UK, but whether that's legal or not is another question. So if people were trying to get over from France to the UK, for example, and they were stopped, when we're in the European Union, we would be able to return. The country would return them to the country that they first entered into the EU, and then their asylum claim would be processed. And if it was found to be valid, they would be given leave to remain. If it wasn't valid, they wouldn't. But since we've left the EU, that mechanism has vanished. Whilst at the same time, what happened with Boris Johnson, whilst at the same time we had, as a result of leaving the EU, we also had vast skills shortages in vital areas of the economy. So the then Conservative government had brought in a points-based immigration system. So if you had the skills that were needed for particular jobs, you could come in much more easily to the country. And actually, some of the more lowly skilled jobs were facing huge shortages. So those were opened up as well for people coming in. Whilst at the same time, we had Boris Johnson wanting to help people in Hong Kong with rising state repression in China. We had also the Ukrainian war had broken out, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And again, the government wanted to help Ukrainian refugees come in. So what ended up happening was an unprecedented spike in immigration. It's coming down now, but there was a huge spike in immigration. And that level of change obviously does bring concerns amongst society. I mean, I do have sympathies towards immigrants. I do, and refugees in particular. I think we do have a duty to help those in the direst of situations. But that's not necessarily a view universally shared by everyone in society. And there have been some concerns around that. I think then at the same time, you do get these populist far right demagogues like Tommy Robertson, who are whipping up absolute abject hatred, often with misinformation, centered around those immigrants. And what its effect has been on society. So, although there may have been some base level concerns amongst the general population anyway, you then have people who are trying to exploit the situation for their own gain. Again, much like in Freeborn, you've got a populist politician who sees a tragic situation happening and thinks, how can I get ahead by doing that? So you find demagogues coming in and trying to exploit that situation for their own gain and making it 10 times worse. And that's where you see the outbreak of these protests and the raising of flags. It's a funny one, really, the raising of flags, because in America, you wouldn't bat an eyelid, would you? It just doesn't happen here in the same way. It's not common. We don't fly flags everywhere here. Whether they should be taken down, no, get on with it. It's fine. People can do what they want. But I think one of the sort of concerns had been they had been used in some ways co-opted, and I think it's very sad actually, co-opted as a symbol of hatred. As the Union flag is, as it's called, the Union flag. I think it's only the Union Jack when it's on ships. When it's on land, it's the Union flag. Is a symbol of the United Kingdom, and the United Kingdom is a very diverse population. We were once a global empire, and many of the people from that empire. Myself, I am a product of that. I'm half English. My mother's English. My dad was born in India and then moved to Pakistan, and then during partition then came here. I'm a product of that colonial legacy, really, and many people in this country are. And that flag is a symbol that everyone really, I think, in this country should feel some sort of kinship to. I absolutely don't think that the flag should be seen as a symbol of the far right, but it's been lately, very recently, co-opted as a symbol used to divide communities rather than pull them together. And that, I think, is probably where Neville's coming from with that. Whether he should get up there and take the flag down, it's up to him. Some people want to get up there, put it down up. Some others want to get up there and take it down. that the flag itself doesn't bother me. It's more what it's used to do and in the context it's using, I would say.
Okay, that makes sense. Last kind of point on this, at least from what I've seen, is, and again, I've not been to London, so I don't know, but I continue to hear that like you shouldn't go out in London with a nice watch because you'll get stabbed and mugged and all these other things. And there's like been a big increase in assaults of the not so well the nature that I won't say the word on YouTube or whatever, but like that, and I've seen a graphic, and it's not just the UK; it's across Europe. And again, I'm not there, so I don't know. And then the other thing that I've seen on social media is people getting arrested for social media posts, and that also seems a bit strange to an American. And again, I don't know how widespread or true that is. There could be anecdotes. But these sorts of things, like especially the safety in London type thing, that's been something that I have been, at least it's been in my social media algorithm, and because I follow the Premier League and people that make content on it, and so it's not just like one post on Twitter, it's like other YouTubers that I've seen who've commented on it, people who live there, and they're like, yeah, it's not safe anymore. I'm moving out to somewhere else that if it was America, I would give you all the locations, but I don't know.
Hmm.
So I think there's a lot of alarm. We see there was an increase in crime, I think, in the U.S. as well, and people rightly or wrongly link the two issues together. Um, and so you get a level of concern. I don't, is that has that been true in the UK? Has there been do people feel less safe now? Is there kind of crackdowns on social media and other sorts of things, or like is that a part of it as well, where maybe we could say we don't agree with how they're going about addressing their grievances, but there is a real issue on the other hand. Like, is that an accurate way to kind of portray it, or how do you see it?
So on the safety issue, I mean, this is I just sort of sounded quite middle of the road earlier, but you're going to get me patriotic now,
Okay.
and defend. You're going to get me patriotic and defend London. London is a really really safe city. It's a beautiful city, and I think you absolutely should visit here. You are not in any danger at all, and I do think that it's almost spurred by the argument that Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, has had with Donald Trump. So they're sort of sparring with each other. And I think Trump did it even previously when Boris Johnson was the mayor of London. Um, you know, kind of calling out London as a place that's not safe, and it's absolutely not true. It's just one of those things. Sometimes, every now and again, Trump makes something up, and it sort of it spreads among society and becomes viral on social media. But it's not true. I mean, I represent one of London's many boroughs, not certainly by a long stretch, not the richest borough in London, but it is very safe. We don't have any gangs here. We don't have guns on the streets. The homicide rate in London and the UK in general is a fraction of what it is in the US, partly because of we don't have access to semi-automatic weapons. But it is, and also we have quite a cohesive society. It has been eroded somewhat in recent decades, but we have a social safety net, which means that those who are even those in the most deprived backgrounds, don't fall below a certain sort of level of safety. We have free healthcare here. You can get council housing here, social housing, which is affordable housing, which can be paid for by the state if you're in the worst situations. And that does, I think, that kind of economic stimulus does help, does help bring down the crime rates. One thing that potentially, there is a valid point though, that there is a difference between actual crime and the perception of crime. And one thing that has disappeared, I think, sadly, from the UK is what we call the Bobby on the beat. The police officer on the street. You can see your local neighbourhood police officer on the street. The money's dried up. The funding has just been stripped away by successive Tory Conservative prime ministers who just slashed the state budget. So the level of the level of access to neighbourhood policing So people are going to feel a bit less safe if they don't see a police officer on every corner like they did when they were growing up decades ago, potentially. But actually, no, the crime rates. I don't believe if you look at the actual statistics, I don't believe the crime rates have gone up. And actually, in terms of homicide rates, I think they've been declining. Um, but it's worth looking, I would say, at statistics rather than just sort of anecdotal reports on it. And certainly, I've not really seen personally in my own both civilian life and also as a politician in London. I've not really seen anything like that. And I've lived all over London in many different parts before finally settling in West London. But I absolutely wouldn't say that London is an unsafe place at all. And I would, I'm bringing up my kids here. I've got two kids. If I was really worried about the safety of London, I would go out to the countryside where I came from, where everything's very peaceful and nothing exciting ever happens, but there's no danger there either. So I would immediately take my kids out of London if I was worried about the safety, but I'm not. Now, in terms of the social media posts, I think possibly if anyone was getting arrested for social media posts, there were last what you don't get arrested here for putting out opinions, really. If you can say something that's mean, you're not going to get arrested for that. What you would get arrested for is incitement to violence, which is a crime here. So if you're saying, if you put on social media, go and smash up the mosque or go and bomb the synagogue, you are going to get arrested for that because that is incitement to violence. And I think there were last summer when there was a flare up, and having just said how safe the UK was, there was a flare up of far right mob violence did happen last summer. Mostly not in London; it was mostly in other parts of the UK. But there was a little flare up of that. And there were arrests around that, and you did have some people getting arrested putting on social media that they wanted to incite violence, and that has happened. But it's not, it's not widespread. We're not a country that goes in for censorship. I mean, we're probably not quite as free speech is not quite as sacrosanct here as it is in the US. I know that it's constitutionally enshrined. We don't have a written constitution, but we're not. You're not going to get arrested for putting an opinion up that someone disagrees with. It really is about if you incite violence, that's a crime.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, like I said, these are just things I heard you're there, and I wanted to pick your brain on it. Okay, so you did mention back to Freeborn as we've taken quite a bit of a detour. You mentioned to me on the phone that I think it was your grandmother was a avid writer, and do you want to touch on that a little bit?
Sure. So, I mean, my family on my dad's side goes back generations in India, in Mysore in the south of India, where my grandmother was born and became a reasonably well-known writer in the subcontinent. Partition happened, in 1947. India gained its independence. It was split into between, it split into then, since then Bangladesh has come along, but with their war of independence, but it was split into India and Pakistan. The old British India was split into India and Pakistan, and soon after, my parent, my father and his parents and family moved north all the way from Mysore in the south of India to Pakistan, because they wanted my grandmother wanted, I think, to be part of that, the foundation of a nation. And she was a very prominent Urdu writer, story writer, literary critic. She founded a literary magazine. So they decided as a family to take that perilous journey north. And I mean, tragically, it was the day that Gandhi was assassinated, was the day that they decided to take that 1,000-mile journey north. And it was a very dangerous day to be traveling, because you would get, and they did have militants with guns boarding the train, looking for people who had a different faith from them. And it was on all sides, this was happening. And they, were hiding under the train seats just to survive. But eventually made it. But it was a dangerous time to move. So they obviously had this sort of burning desire to go north and be part of something, I think, which was the foundational story of Pakistan. And she became well known there as a writer, and one of the first really writers who was really pioneering Urdu language literature. And I never met her. She passed away before I was born. My father then, he was age 20 when he came to the UK, to go to university essentially, and then he met my mum, who's English, settled down here. Actually, he became an English teacher himself. Yeah, he moved to Suffolk, rural Suffolk. You know, where I think we were the only ethnic minority family in the village, and he taught English to kids in the local school. And I remember this love of stories, of words, this passion for literature, which came from his mother to him, was absolutely passed on to me. You know, I can remember from the age of 6, he's reading Shakespeare to me, he's reading Lord of the Rings to me, and it's just stirred this love of language and what you can do with language and storytelling and world building and all of that kind of stuff. Which, you know, even though I never met my grandmother, and really only met many years later did I actually find out that she was, you know, a reasonably influential figure back in the subcontinent. And now I'm finding out as people are sort of beginning to discover my work and, you know, mentioning her in the same breath. You know, but that even though I never met her, and I say all that, you know, all that passion for literature and language definitely came from somewhere, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So you grew up in Sussex, where
Suffolk. I grew up in
or
Suffolk, which
Suffolk,
is
sorry.
another. They're both rural counties in the south of England. Suffolk is a bit further. Is in the east. Sussex is in the south. Freeborn is set in Sussex,
Ah,
because
okay.
I didn't want to set it in Suffolk. It was a bit too
Yeah,
close to them.
okay.
But a lot of that
Fair
rural
enough.
Italy sort of bleeds through into
So
it.
when you're growing up and like your dad's reading you Lord of the Rings and Shakespeare and all these sorts of things, you didn't really go the writer path. You found your way back to it. Although I imagine maybe you were writing some and you enjoyed those classes in school and university and whatever. But because you went in, did you go straight into the politics route? Because you've
No,
been doing
I did
work
become
in.
a writer first. I was a journalist for some years,
Okay,
and then you know I edited a couple of magazines in the current affairs and business space. Did some sort of expose stories. Wrote for a few newspapers, including the Guardian, the New Statesman magazine. I've written articles for Huffington Post. I've written for. So I wrote, but it was non-fiction.
right.
And to be honest, I was writing fiction as well. It's never got it. It never really took off. I was writing more sort of esoteric literary stuff, and then I've finally decided to go with something a bit more commercial this time, but whilst smuggling those literary ideas in it.
Yeah. So I guess what I was getting at is so you weren't writing necessarily the story or kind of the stories, but
Mm.
you were juggling you're doing environmental work, you're involved in politics and journalism and kind of the news and economic sort of they all kind of intertwine when you're a
Mm.
journalist and they all kind of relate to one another. How are you juggling all that? How did you decide that you wanted to go into politics versus maybe staying with the environmental route, right? For example, when you go into politics, then all of a sudden you have to kind of pick sides, at least in the
Mm.
US and to a lesser extent in England, because there's more than two parties, right? There are more than
Yeah,
two parties, first past the
yeah.
post system. Yeah, so like you kind of are then staking a claim and you're with the way things are, maybe you're avoiding working with somebody else or somebody over there because you've now staked this claim as, yeah, I'm running for this political office. So what was the environmental stuff first or the political stuff first?
Um, I guess the environmental stuff probably because you know I was I mean, I've always been political and always been environmentalist. I was, you know, protesting against, you know, big oil, you know, and the Iraq War when I was a teenager. But I wasn't an elected politician. I was political.
Sure.
I was sort of had a megaphone and a placard in my hand. And then how I sort of became an elected politician. Well, you know, I spent quite a lot of time, you know, shouting about everything I thought was wrong with the world and not really doing anything about it, but just shouting about it on the street. And you know, I'd write a bit, and you know, but also you kind of feel that sometimes things to affect change in this world, you know, can be very difficult. To affect big change on a national scale can be very difficult. And you know, we'd tried to stop the Iraq War, didn't happen. You know, we tried to
That would have been
wrote,
better for everyone if that
indeed,
didn't happen.
indeed. You know, we try to affect change on climate change, but it's so difficult to, you know, change that juggernaut's course. So what can I do? Well, you know, I started thinking local, and I started thinking, what can I do on a ground level to try and make people's lives a bit better? And I'd settled in West London in the London Borough of Hounslow, and I'd sort of bought my first place there. Before that, I was moving around everywhere, renting all over London. But then I finally settled in a place and found a community and thought, I'm going to get stuck into this community. I'm going to do something for it. So I stood for election and won a seat, got promoted to cabinet, so running the borough with a small group of others, where my portfolio is primarily on public spaces, culture, and culture and public spaces. And I got to trying to affect some sort of change in terms of the how we can use green space to enhance people's lives, essentially, because that's the one thing I had green space that I could actually do things with. And some of that thinking came about because we had in my ward, we had in my constituency, we had a 3 acre patch of land called Park Road Allotment, which had been used to feed wounded soldiers. Going back 100 years, had been used to feed wounded soldiers coming back from World War One, and it was beloved by the community. Used as a wildlife haven. Kids would come and do bug hunts there, and it's an absolutely beautiful little space. But it sat on land owned by the Duke of Northumberland, who had, for many, his ancestors had leased it to the council to originally to feed wounded soldiers, and then as a community asset. But the latest Duke had decided, well, I can see pound symbols over this land. I'm gonna kick all the allotment holders off, revoke the lease to the council, kick the allotment holders off, and turn it into flats. So I started the campaign. Well, not just me. There were many others involved as well, with the allotment holders and the Isleworth Society residents group. We got together and we started this campaign to save these allotments. And you might think, who the hell cares about 3 acres of allotments in West London? But it became a national campaign. And being a journalist and then moving into founding a PR firm, I've got a lot of journalist connections, and I managed to get widespread national news coverage of this campaign. But we saved it. We won the campaign, and it really became framed between it was framed by the media as a peasants' revolt or a David versus Goliath fight. And you had on one hand allotment holders who you just wanted to tend their land. On the other hand, you had one of the richest and most powerful people in the UK. And we won. Ultimately, we saved that site, and we forced a victory. But all through doing that, it got me to thinking, well, these are things that people really care about. Like the passion that came out of the people that I was working with, the allotment holders who wanted to preserve that site. So I thought, what if we could create new allotments and create new green space that can really change more lives? And you had at the same time that we'd just come out of the pandemic, and there was this race for green space. Everyone wanted, everyone was shut up in their houses. Those without gardens were shut up in flats. It was hugely detrimental to people's mental and physical health as well. And there's a huge sort of surge in people wanting more green space around them. So, and at the same time, we in West London, you have schools with kids that they don't know where carrots come from. They think carrots come from the supermarket. They've no experience like I did growing up. With a vegetable patch in my parents' garden and a nature reserve at the bottom of my school. There's this disconnect from nature. So I thought all of that came together. I thought I'm going to take all this wasteland that we've got around across West London in our patch in Hounslow, and this could be fly-tipped wasteland, it could be fenced off, it could be attracting antisocial behaviour. Let's take that and turn it into allotments and community gardens and orchards, and then pair them with schools in deprived areas. So these kids who've not got any access to green space can learn about sustainability, biodiversity, and healthy living, and where their food comes from. So that is an example of, I realized I can't stop climate change, and I can't stop a massively regionally destabilizing war, which has killed well over 1 million people. But I can make a few people's lives better with some allotments, and if that goes on my gravestone, then that's all I ever managed to achieve. Then I'll be happy with that.
Yeah, I would say so. Um, Speaking of the more broad, like climate change issue, where are you guys with nuclear energy?
The UK or me personally?
Well, both, I guess.
Yeah. Well, the UK at the moment is building new nuclear plants.
Okay, good.
Um, yeah, I agree with you actually, which might sound sound contrarian as an environmentalist, but I think there was certainly a period I went through when I thought, well, nuclear energy is far from ideal, but I think we've got to use everything we've got now if we're going to turn climate change around, and ideally that's wind and solar. And in the UK, actually, wind renewable energy is quite bountiful because we're a coastal nation. We've got coastal around us, so there's plenty of wind power available. But we do have to use every tool in our arsenal to end our dependence on fossil fuels, and I think nuclear is one of them.
Yeah, yeah, no, I fully agree, and especially here in the U.S., there's been some resistance for some time, but I think that that's starting to turn as well. I've got friends that are kind of running and running environmental sort of groups, and they're lobbying on Capitol Hill for these sorts of things, and I think people are starting to see the way because they're like, if you dispose of the waste properly, like it's actually
Mm,
quite clean, relative to fossil fuels and coal and oil and all these other things. Although with that said, I think fossil fuels and oil is not going anywhere anytime
mm.
soon, as most of the infrastructure is built on that, and so to actually rip up all the infrastructure and turn it around overnight is not really feasible in a practical perspective. But um, in any event, okay, so you're doing this with the schools, you're building the green spaces, and you're kind of leading that charge in your borough. Um, wh when you're kind of, I'll say leading air quotes, leading the campaign against that Duke, did it ever occur to you like, hey, I'm crossing one of the most powerful people in this country. This could have some consequences if it doesn't go well. And then if so, how did that sort of work itself out? Because and if you don't mind speaking from the perspective of like we don't have royalty in America
Mm.
the same way that you guys do. So I can imagine maybe the dynamic is a little bit different.
Well, I mean, the Duke, he got his title. His family got his title because they were one of the people, well, one of the families who came over with William the Conqueror in 1066, and then killed enough people and decided this was their land and gave themselves titles. That's essentially where the English aristocracy comes from. You know,
Oh.
if you put up a fence and say this is mine, and you've got a big enough stick, then you get a title back then, and then they were passed on from generation to generation. But not all of the English aristocracy are particularly rich or wealthy. It really depends. These titles persist, but some of the aristocracy have used their money in investments in working their land in such a way that they've become fabulously wealthy through it. And the Duke of Northumberland is one of those people who has built a property empire essentially. A real estate empire through the land that he owns, the vast tracts of land that he owns, and that's one of the reasons why he wanted to build flats on these allotments. He's got a track record of doing that all over the country where he has land is trying to develop it into flats. And that's not to say that I'm not anti building houses. I'm not anti building flats. We need housing, but we've got plenty of brownfield sites that you can build on. So let's build on the wasteland and turn that into flats, and then let preserve our green spaces, because I think really for our residents, it's not just about giving people places to live, but it's about quality of life as well. So green space is very important for giving people quality of life. So I had no doubt in my mind that we had to run this campaign. It's a funny question though that you asked, because I have a friend from Colombia, and he'd read about this campaign that I was running in the news, because it really was everywhere in the news, and he said to me, why doesn't this dude just have you whacked? Because that's if
Yeah.
if you're running that campaign in Colombia, that's what would happen to you if you crossed a big land baron in such a way. Then yeah, they'd probably put a target on your back. But no, it's here. It all comes down to planning laws essentially, and it was a legal battle essentially over whether he had the right to build on that land and whether he had the right to evict those allotment holders. And ultimately, it came down to lawyers on both sides fighting it out in what essentially was similar to a courtroom. Um, my part in it was I was drawing attention to it and making sure that journalists were covering it and making sure that if he followed through with his threat, because if he followed through with his threat to evict these allotment holders, that people would know about it, and that it would not look very good. So it became a reputational issue, I think, and ultimately he didn't follow through with his threat. The legal battle, we won the legal battle. He wasn't allowed to build on it. He had threatened to kick the allotment holders off if he didn't win the legal battle and wasn't allowed to build on it. But I think the attention that we'd managed to give to this cause meant that he couldn't feasibly do that.
Fair enough. Well, that's good. No, nobody's whacking you anytime soon. Um, okay, so the other thing that you had mentioned to me is, and you mentioned earlier in the show as well, is this Carter Fleet PR firm that you've started. And I had taken kind of a quick look at the website, but do you want to kind of describe what it is that you're doing? And I think a lot of people hear the term PR firm and they don't actually know what it means. So if you want to kind of describe what it is that you guys are doing and why you started it and what you hope to accomplish.
Yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, we get press coverage for people and organizations, global press coverage in the biggest newspapers and TV outlets that there are in all the major media markets on the planet. And I've got a global network of people that I work with, PR experts and journalists, and pretty much every major country in the world. I've got a huge network that I've built up through many years. First of all, as a journalist, getting those media contacts through the work that I was doing, and also as a politician, gaining lots of media contacts that way. And then for a while I worked for another PR agency, and for a while I was in-house working for an education organization as their chief communications officer. And I just sort of over time had grown this global network of people in the media that I could rely on to tell good stories, who were hungry for good stories, who wanted to tell good stories. And and the crux of what we do at Carter Fleet is we tell good stories. And one of the things that I've always say is we're not gonna work for an arms manufacturer or or a tobacco company, anyone who's harming health or burning up the planet. I'm not, they more than anyone, they probably need good PR. They need to sort of greenwash or whitewash their reputations. But I'm not interested in that. What I'm interested in doing is taking good people, good organizations, it doesn't matter, whether they're businesses or charities, as long as they're trying to do good in the world, whether it's through research or through social impact causes. But if a tree falls in a forest and no one's around to hear about it, did it really make a sound? So we make a sound for them, and we make sure that people know that they're doing good, and and we shout about these good things that they're doing, and get global news coverage for it.
Yeah, that makes total sense. All the one, at least the through line for me for all the stuff that you're doing is that you are kind of taking, whether it's the lead or you're starting it or you're writing your own thing, or what was the um maybe the trigger for you to say, I'm going to bet on myself and I'm going to run for politics and I'm going to start my own company and I'm going to write my own book. Because a lot of people I think would maybe love to take some risks of that nature, and they've got bills or kids or other things, and they're like, oh, this job pays well and health insurance, or well, it's a little bit different of the health insurance anyways. But the people are like, oh, I've got bills to pay, rent, etc. Like, so I have to stay, and I don't have the time to write this book, or I don't have the bandwidth to do this other thing on the side. How, I guess, so there's two folds within that, which is like, one, what was the conversation for you to take the leap and to kind of, I'm betting on myself and I'm going to do these things. And then the second one is like, how do you manage your time between all these things? Because
Mm.
these are not minute little things that you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, you never know whether these things are going to come off. I don't know how. I mean, Freeborn's doing quite well at the moment. It's become an Amazon bestseller on pre-order, but you never know. You might get to launch day, might never sell another copy. I certainly didn't know how it was going to turn out when I started writing it. I had no idea whether it would even get published when I started writing it. So it is a risk, but I loved writing it. I enjoyed it every second of writing it. So in a sense, it wasn't a risk in that sense. I was always going to want to write it, whether it got published or not. Obviously, launching a company is a bigger risk, especially in an uncertain economy. And I'd sort of built up enough contacts, in the media industry, and I have a very solid, excellent business partner who's very well connected in the business world, the education world, who brings a lot of experience to the table and a lot of contacts to the table as well to mitigate some of that risk. And standing in politics, absolutely, there's always a risk. You never know whether you're going to get selected for a seat, whether you're going to win the election. You've got to fight hard. But I always come back. I always come back to this quote in Star Trek Generations. It's not the best loved Star Trek film, but I just love the quote, and I think it's James T. Kirk is saying to Captain Picard, "Risk is part of the game if you want to sit in that chair." And I think absolutely, if you want to get on in life, if you want to do things that you enjoy, that you think can make a difference to the world, but also if can enrich your life or enrich the lives of others, or can just be genuinely interesting, well, you got to take a risk, haven't you? You got to roll those dice and see if it comes off. And I'd probably frankly, I'd probably get bored if I didn't do all these things. I always like to be doing stuff. I'll sleep when I'm dead, I think. And but how to find the time? Well, actually, conversely, I started writing the novel when my first son was born. And he's 2.5 now. But he would get me up at 5:30 every morning, and suddenly I had all these hours that I didn't know existed because I was in bed before. But what was I going to do with it? I'd give him his milk and sit there and he'd be holding his milk and take bloody ages over it. What am I going to do? So I just started writing and writing and writing. Taking the nursery, I had some hours before my day job started, so I'd write again. I'd burn the midnight oil a bit as well in the evenings. But I think kind of having kids kind of focuses your time. All the hours that I was previously probably wasting away in the pub, to be honest. Suddenly I just thought, I'm gonna have to focus here and use this time productively. So I did, and that's how the novel emerged essentially.
Yeah, that makes sense. Did you ever was putting yourself in the public eye? Because all these things are in the public eye to some extent. Was that ever well, is the risk like we just talked about, but was that a risk that you had thought about for like your family and loved ones, like them taking some, like for example, if you're running for a political office and there's a group of people that really don't like what you have to say, then all of a sudden maybe you have created some risk for people around you as well. Was that part of the thought process, like you and your wife, like when you spoke prior to doing that, or like what's the calculation there?
I think with the sort of local politics I'm involved in, it's not a huge risk, I would say. I mean, there are certainly people who disagree with my policies on some things, and I certainly have political opponents. Most political opponents, though, that I have, I would happily sit down for a pint with afterwards. We'd thrash out our differences in the debating chamber, and then go away and have a drink. It's not we're loggerheads. There are certain elements of the public who might be opposed to policies here and there that I've been espousing. But I think we're genuinely a relatively civil society. And you attack the policy, you don't attack the person, really, ultimately. And I don't, there have been a few instances in national politics of MPs recently being assassinated, in particularly febrile times. But it's not something that I've particularly thought would be likely, to affect my family. I've never felt personally in physical danger getting up and espousing a policy, but you never know. I do take precautions. I don't tend to take too many photos with my kids in political photographs and things like that. I tend to keep them out of the public eye as much as possible. And yeah, I mean, it's been okay, but it's a valid thought and a valid question, because sometimes the worst can happen, and one does have to be conscious of that. Absolutely.
Yeah, and unfortunately, all it takes is one nut job, and
Mm.
so, anyways, I figured I would ask more out of curiosity than anything else. To kind of wrap a little bit, walk me through the process for the book, because as we've kind of touched on throughout all the subjects that we've talked about, you've kind of touched on all these things throughout the book. How, in terms of weaving these subjects and these literary kind of stories into the packaging of a murder mystery, I guess walk me through the process of did you have all these things laid out before you're like I want to touch on the faith and I want to touch on the environmental and I want to touch on this, but did you have all these beforehand planned out or like how did you even get started with that?
Pretty much actually. So I had this. As I said earlier, I sort of had the ending in my head.
Hmm.
I just woke up one morning and the twist came to me, and then that as a result, I sort of had the beginning and the ending in my head, and I didn't know everything that was going to happen at that point. I had a sort of vague structure. I didn't know everything was going to happen. But I'm not like J.J. Abrams. J.J. Abrams, he says, he started Lost and he didn't know how he was going to finish it, and it shows by the end. He just sort of made it up as he went along, and that's really annoying. It's really annoying. So I never wanted to do that. I didn't want to sort of just make it up as I went along. So I sort of wrote the first chapter, but because I didn't know quite what was going to happen next, I then didn't do anything for a year, and I just sat on it. And then I'd be on the bus and I'd have the notes open on my phone. If I had an idea, I'd just jot it down. I might be, walking somewhere. Suddenly, I'd think of something. I'd just stop and write it down. And I did that for about a year. And then, as I say, my son was born, and I suddenly had to focus my time. And I had all these notes, and just sort of compiled them and sort of structured them and organized all my thoughts. And then suddenly, it just all clicked together. And within 3 months, I'd written the whole thing, and I knew absolutely everything was going to happen. I think, in terms of the overall arching themes, those had always been intended to be in there. I always wanted to ask questions about human nature. I always wanted to, probe into what we are deep down. What makes us what we are. Are we born the way we are, or are we conditioned by society? And how does technology and the rapid changing nature of technology and society affect that? I'd always wanted to think about it in those terms. And I knew that a murder mystery was going to be a way that I could do that without losing people's attention. This isn't like, this is it's not meant to be some sort of esoteric philosophical book, even though there's a lot of philosophy in it. And I wanted to wrap it up in something which is easily digestible and people could enjoy, whether or not they wanted to delve into the deeper philosophy of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then the editing process, like for people that have never written a book before, not talked to an author before, like how I think people, well, if I didn't know as much, I think I would be curious, like what actually happened. Like they tell you, okay, you got to take this chapter out because we didn't like, or like,
Mm.
how does it work?
Yeah. So I mean, in terms of I'm very stringent self-editor at first. So I don't progress unless I'm very happy. So if I get to the end of a sentence and I'm not happy with it, I go back and rewrite the sentence. Then I get to the end of the paragraph and I'm not happy, I go back and rewrite that. And then if I get to the end of the chapter and I'm not happy, I go back and rewrite that. And I only progress when I'm 100% happy with where I've got. Whether other people are 100% happy with that, that's up to them. But if I need to feel I'm happy with what I've done before I progress. So when I got to the end of the book, I'd actually I only really needed from me a relatively light edit, because I felt that I'd edited very very stringently as I'd gone, and and actually the publisher only ended up doing a very light edit. I mean, they found some typos I hadn't found, and AI hadn't found. So I'm very pleased for that. But there wasn't any sort of sense of ripping things up and taking out chapters. And part of that's because I'd been quite disciplined based on previous failures. I had written previous novels that never went anywhere. I wrote one that was about 190,000 words long, and I sent it to some agents, and they said, "Well, the story's good, but you've got to cut it in half if you want to get it anywhere. Probably cut it to about a third." So this time round, I thought I'm not gonna do that. I'm going to be very very structured, and as a result, I sort of kind of knew by knowing where I'd gone wrong before. I knew what a publisher would say when they read it, and not have to make these sort of big cuts.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Do you have, well, is there anything that I haven't asked you that I should have or that you want to touch on?
No, I think you've covered a lot.
All right, sounds good. So tell the people where they can find the book.
So Freeborn's available anywhere you can find books. It's a bestseller on Amazon at the moment. It's available for pre-order. It's out in the UK on October the 28th, in the US on November the 1st, but you can pre-order it now on Amazon. You can go on Barnes and Noble. You can go on any of the other big online bookstores. You'll probably find it in hopefully some bookshops as well physically. But yeah, go on Amazon.com and pre-order it there if you like the sound of it.
Very nice. So for those listening, of course, links will be in the description. As always, this will be out right before the book is out, so give it a pre-order. Um, any last kind of thoughts before we get you out of here?
Simply, thank you for having me. There's been such a wide-ranging conversation. I didn't know we were going to touch on so many issues that have gone to the heart of British society. But it made me think about them as well, and I really appreciate you for asking those questions because sometimes it is easy to just sort of sit there in in your bubble and not ask questions of yourself and your ideas and where society's going because we're all bubbled by algorithms. Facebook feeds us what we want to X feed. They feed us what we want to hear because we've liked it before. And I'm a pretty pinko liberal, I have to say, as you can probably imagine. But it's good to hear other perspectives from outside of the UK and how some of these things are being perceived. Then I end up challenging my own ideas and working out where we got to this point. So thank you for asking those questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I like you mentioned about the bubbles. This is one of the reasons why I do this show is because I don't want to be in my own bubble and I get to talk to all sorts of people who are doing all sorts of things and I see something on the internet and it's like, "Hey, I'm actually about to talk to a guy who is involved in the political scene there. Like, let me ask him about it." And it's just and then to be able to share it with people is kind of I don't know, it's honestly, never in wildest dreams imagined I would have been here like 200 and however many episodes later. So, very much appreciate your time and your candor and like I said at the beginning, the book was sensational and for those listening, you guys should definitely go order it. I highly recommend. It's a page turner for sure. And links will be in the description, and we'll see you guys next time. Peace.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the World XP podcast. If you want to watch another episode like this one, click there. If you want to subscribe, click there.